Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day one of baking, intro to baking. I like that. Do that again. Woo, woo, woo. Ready for some baking. Ready for some baking. Welcome to day one of intro to baking. We're going to be looking at the principles of the bake shop. Now, pastry chefs and savory chefs, honestly, are two different beasts, okay? We look at things differently. We process things differently, but we also kind of have the same skin, if you will. You still have to have the same time management, mise en place. Who can tell me what mise en place is? Y'all should have remembered that from first quarter.
Everything in place.
Everything in its place. Absolutely. And that is even more so important in the bake shop or in the pastry chef kitchen. The other unique defined difference you're going to find in the majority of bake shops is how we scale ingredients. And the key word there is scale. Because we do not just throw things in a pot. We go by specific formulas, and each baking ingredient has a specific purpose, and you're going to find that once you get to know how these ingredients react to each other, that you can interchange them. But until you understand that, I'm going to recommend anytime you guys look at a recipe, make sure that you follow the recipe as instructed, because baking is a science and they all have to work together and they all have that specific function. Too much, too little, not enough, way too much, all of that can throw your whole baking project down the drain. The other thing is how we scale, and we scale typically by grams, okay? Because grams is the most specific way of measuring your ingredients. So using a scale and weighing. And I've got a challenge for you guys. Sometime today or, just sometime in the near future, I want you to try this. Take a cup, a measuring cup, not a liquid cup, but a measuring dry ingredient measuring cup. And I want you to weigh 1 cup of flour, okay? And when you weigh it, put it on your grams on your scale. If you don't have a scale, I'm going to encourage you to go get one. We're going to be using them in class. I want you to weigh that flour, 2, 3, 4 times. You're going to find that each time that you weigh that flour, it's totally different because you cannot get accurate using the cup method. Okay, that's why we weigh using a scale. Yes, Bradley.
So you want us to bring our own scale?
No, honey, no. I want you to try this at home. Okay, just to bring a realization that weighing your ingredients is way more accurate than using measuring cups. Okay? All right. Everybody silence your mics unless you have a question. Robert, silence your mic, please. Okay, so formulas. Yes. Yes.
So the grams are very accurate when you're doing like flour and stuff like that?
Absolutely.
It's accurate?
Yep. 120 grams is 1 cup of standard all-purpose flour. Now, keep in mind, nothing weighs the same. So it's really important to get to know your ingredients, okay? It's 128 grams in like bread flour because bread flour is heavier, and I won't go into all of that right now. We'll learn a little more about that later. But 120 grams of flour is 120 grams of flour every time you weigh it. Versus using a measuring cup and getting your flour using a measuring cup. It's going to be different every time. One time you may have a little more, one time you may have a little less. So when you get used to using a scale and weighing your ingredients, your formulas, aka recipes, will always be exactly the same. Okay.
So we'll be using a tilt scale, pretty much.
No, we will be using a digital scale when you come to class. Okay.
Got it.
All right, good deal. Hey, Gizmo, good to see you again. So the key term I need y'all to remember here is formula, okay? And I need you to make sure that you make note that formulas rely on weighing to ensure accuracy, all right? They rely on weighing to ensure accuracy. The biggest mistakes are often not discovered until the product is finished. Let's keep in mind, unlike your savory counterpart, you know how in your savory classes you were tasting, and you could throw more salt in there, or you could throw more of this or throw more of that. You can't do that in baking. You're not going to know if your product came out right or wrong until it's done. And if it's wrong, guess what? You got to start all over. That's why it is more precise, and accurate when it comes to your ingredients. You have to be that way, okay? That's why it's very important in a bake shop to follow those standardized recipes. Who can tell me what a standardized recipe is? What does it do? We learned that in past class.
Save waste.
It saves waste, but it also takes out the guesswork and mistakes of a recipe, right? It reduces the mistakes because it's standardized. It's foolproof. If you follow those written ingredient weights and you follow those instructions, it's going to come out the way it should, okay? Now, there are a lot of different tools and equipment you're going to see in a bake shop. When y'all come back in, we'll discuss some of those. But for today, just note most bake shops have cake pans, tart pans, different spatulas, and we'll learn the different spatulas because there's offset spatulas that we commonly call cake spatulas. They can come offset or straight. There's rubber spatulas. There's the mixers are a little bit different. Bain-Marie. Who knows what a Bain-Marie is? I find that quite interesting. Who knows what a Bain-Marie is? Yes, LaTanya. What's a Bain-Marie? LaTanya, you raise your hand. You know what a Bain-Marie is? Turn your speaker on.
He said
it's like a storage container.
it's like a storage container.
No. It is a double broiler. So we know what a double broiler is, right? You've seen cooks have either they have a double boiler that's designed to be a double boiler, or they'll take a pot with a little bit of water in the bottom of it and they have a glass bowl on top. That's also a double boiler or Bain-Marie. But I'm going to tell y'all for your test, you need to know what a Bain-Marie is, okay? That's B-A-I-N Marie, Bain-Marie. Know what that is. Also in the bake shop, you have a lot of different like cake tools, piping tips, piping bags, combs for decorating your cakes and things like that. Now, we're going to move on from tools and equipment to ingredients. I want to point this out. In your book, okay, please, please, please pay attention. If you don't pay attention to anything else, and again, this is not me telling you don't read your book, but pay attention to your side notes, okay? They give you the functions of specific ingredients and some definitions and terms that you need to know. So if you're not going to look at anything else, not calling any specific names, please pay attention to those little side notes in your book, all right? So let's talk about flour. Flour is the number one important ingredient, okay? And you're going to learn flour is the mainstay, all right? Even when we get ready to look at our baker's percentage, flour is 100% of any recipe, all right? So keep that in mind. Flour provides bulk structure. It thickens liquids, just like, remember y'all made a roux? What's roux? Do y'all remember what roux is in savory?
Fat and flour.
Flour and fat. right?
Equal parts fat, flour.
Yep, fat and flour, and the flour is the thickener. So the same thing in our baked goods. It provides thickening. Flour is produced, and if y'all were in class, when y'all come back to class, I'll show you this. You have a wheat kernel, all right? So when millers start grinding away at the outer husk and getting into that germ there, you're going to find that the varying as they get closer to the center, the varying levels of that germ is where the wheat is milled from. So the germ closest to the endosperm in the middle, I hope I've got those two right. Sometimes I say those backwards. But anyway, as you mill closest to the center, that's where your cake flour is going to come from. That is your innermost, tenderest part of the flour. All right, when they mill it. And the further out you get, that is your all-purpose flour or your higher protein flour, okay, if you will. So when they grind these kernels, that's where you start getting your flour. Corn, rice, and wheat are the most significant grains used in the bake shop. Obviously, cornmeal, cornbread, rice flour. Yeah, we don't use that a whole. I don't. But when you get into more ethnic cooking, like Japan and all them rice noodles and all that kind of stuff, soba, soba noodles made from rice. Y'all, international people, is that rice? Those soba noodles. I'm thinking it is. And then of course you've got your wheat flours. Okay. Moving on from that, talking about wheat flours, I just said they're wheat kernels. They're made from milling doughs. Inside flour, you're going to find protein and starch. The one thing I want to point out is every flour is not designed the same, okay? I need you to remember that. Each flour, cake flour, typically has 7 to 9% protein factor, which means it has a very low gluten level, okay? As you go up through the chain from cake pastry flour to your all-purpose flour to your bread flours, you know, as you go higher, your bread flours can have 12 to 14, okay, protein. So that means they have a sturdier structure level, all right? So when it comes to baked goods, you need to decide how much protein to hold that structure do you need. Bread, what gives it that chewy texture, that beautiful, firm, chewy texture that you get like in a French baguette, that's because they're using a higher end protein flour like bread flour or a combination thereof. But now cake would not taste very good if it was chewy, would it? Or very firm. We want a light, fluffy, airy, tender cake. So we don't want a whole lot of protein or gluten impact, if you will. Again, they contain starch and protein, and just what I said, the innermost part of the kernel is the germ. I did have it right. Sometimes I talk before my PowerPoints, if y'all notice. If you were in class, you would notice I'm feeding you information before I get to the actual PowerPoint. During the milling, obviously, that's what I just said. The kernels are cracked and the bran and the germ are removed. Patent flour is made from the portion of the endosperm closest to the germ. And I think I did have that backwards. Clear flour is made from the portion of the endosperm that is closest to the bran. Now, clear flour would be like your cake flour, okay? Your lighter flour. That's what they're calling your lighter flour. All right, so to move on. Flour contains nutrients. Yes.
So what you're saying is we got to be able to look at, it's like the different seasons that we went through in the beginning. We got to be able to look at and decide for what type of flour we got to use.
Depending on your baking project, that will depend or dictate the protein level or the flour that you're using. Absolutely. So let's think about this. Cake flour is called cake flour for a reason, all right, because it's used in cake. But you need to understand the reason it's used in cake is because it has a lower protein factor, okay? Pastry flour, same way. Pastry and cake flour can typically be interchanged, but they have a lower gluten or protein factor. Bread flour is named bread flour for that reason. It's used for bread because it has a higher protein or gluten factor. It gives you more structure to your baked good. Okay, does that kind of answer that? So yeah, depending on your project.
No. It does it, chef. It does it, chef. So we got to look at a rack and just be like, okay, that's cake flour, that's that flour.
Exactly.
In my mind, flour looks the same.
It does look the same, but each individual flour has a different protein or starch, gluten, if you will, level. So, and also depending on if it's bleached or unbleached, that plays a role in it as well. So that's why flours are typically named after their uses. Now, all-purpose flour, it can be all-purpose. It's about middle of the road, but again, you still have to remember the use that you're gonna actually use it for can play a role in what you're doing. And a lot of chefs will take, let's say you're making a pie crust, okay? If you're making a pie crust, any of y'all ever made pie crust? Has anybody ever made a pie crust before at home? All right. You ever notice that if you overwork it, all right, and if you're using a higher protein flour, you go to roll it out, but it keeps shrinking back? You go to roll it out and it shrinks back. That's because you've developed the gluten strands in there. And those gluten strands, they don't like to be manipulated once they are developed. They like to stay nice and tight and together. So there's things that you can do, and I won't get too far off into that. When we look at pies, and when y'all come back to do pies, we'll talk more about it. But a lot of chefs will take and use maybe half pastry flour and half all-purpose, or they'll use all pastry flour where they don't have to fight with all those gluten strands, stretching them out and keeping them stretched out. Does that make sense?
We'll find out in the kitchen. Okay,
you will find out in the kitchen. I promise. It sounds confusing, but you'll find out in the kitchen. So the one thing I need y'all to remember is the composition of wheat flours. They have 5 nutrients: fat, minerals, moisture, starch, and protein. Okay, that's what you need to remember about that. The moisture cannot exceed 14% by government standards, but also that depends on your climate. Starch is necessary for the absorption of moisture. We already know the starch part of flour thickens things. That's what thickens, is the starch, and it absorbs the moisture. That's why a lot of times, a lot of products that you make, they'll have you, let it rest overnight or something. That's so that the moisture can be absorbed. And then protein in the flour, when you moisten the protein, that's what develops the gluten. That and manipulation. When you are kneading bread, that develops your gluten formation, okay? And gluten is the rubbery substance. It's the stretch. Your gluten strands loosen and they can stretch when mixed with water. So that's why we do that, and we let it rest, and we manipulate it. We let it rest. It's definitely an art to doing it. Protein in wheat flours. Again, I just went through some of this, so I'm not going to read everything that's on the PowerPoint because I kind of already told you. Lower protein flours are like cake flours, pastry flours. Higher proteins are your bread flours. Of course, higher protein creates chewy, crispy products. Lower, more tender. Softer wheat flours are low in protein. And hard, strong flours they're higher in protein, and they're great for breads. And then in your book, if you look on page 903, everybody look on page 903 with me. If you got your book in front of you, turn to page 903. You're going to see there your protein content of flours. This is exactly what I was already explaining, okay? And I should have had y'all turn it in your book already, but Anyway, just remember high gluten flours, besides what is listed here, they're great for pizza flours. Okay, so make sure. Let me go back and make sure there wasn't anything. Yeah, you're going to find the composition of wheat flours on page 902. Yeah, pretty much that's where we're at. 901 is your ingredient, the flour. And we're really covering flour in depth because, again, flour is central to, you're going to use a lot of flour, okay? Now, you can see there's specialty flours, all right? Whole wheat, vital gluten, self-rising. Keep in mind, self-rising flour, okay? You can make your own. I won't give you the ratio right now, but self-rising is a combination of your chemical leavener, usually baking powder and salt added to it. So you can always replace self-rising in a recipe. You just omit the leavener. I always have you omit the baking powder, all right, and the salt, and use self-rising, all right, or vice versa. They're also continued on specialty flours. You got your non-wheat flours, okay? I know right now what's really popular is like the almond flour, coconut flour, you know, all these other specialty flours, because people for some reason are on a keto. I tried for 2 days, did not succeed. Yeah, I know, right, Latasha? I decided I better just eat my sugar in smaller amounts. But yeah, and then you got rye flour for rye bread. Okay. Those are all, talking about, specialty flours. Now, vital wheat gluten, I know that was on the last slide. If you have like an all-purpose flour, but you want to increase the protein factor, y'all ever seen in the grocery store the vital wheat gluten? You can purchase that and add that to your lower or your weaker flour and increase the protein in that, okay? Functions of sugar and sweeteners. They're on page 905. You're going to find that. Sugar and sweeteners, they provide flavor and color. They tenderize products by weakening those gluten strands. So when you add sugar to a baked good or a product, it actually weakens those gluten strands. When you're making yeast breads and stuff, it provides yeast food. So, and we'll talk more about yeast in a little bit later, but yeah, so yeast, obviously they consume, you know, sugars and starches, and when they consume those products, they expel a gas, and that's what causes your baked goods to rise. They are a living organism. They are one of your 3 leaveners in baked goods. Sugars are carbs. They can be double or complex. Who knows what lactose, where do we get lactose sugar from? The word lactose ought to give that away. Somebody tell me, where does lactose come from?
It comes from fake cows.
From, did you say fake calves?
You said fake. You said lactose. What? You said fake lactose, right?
No, I was just asking, where does lactose sugar come from? Where
okay, lactose sugar. So I'm thinking, okay, so it comes from cow like milk. I'm thinking,
milk, exactly. I'm like, fake cows? I don't know if I ever heard of it.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
my fault. My fault. I talk crazy. But yeah, milk. Yeah, milk. Yeah.
No, there you go. All right, dairy products. All right, so most sugar is sucrose, and that's made from sugar cane or sugar beets, believe it or not. Let's see. If you continue on, types of sugar, all right? You have turbinado sugar. Those are your coarse crystals. We'll use that, you know, like let's say you made that peach cobbler that Robert Swanson mentioned earlier, and you wanted to add some cinnamon and sugar on top of that crust before you bake it. Turbinado sugar would be perfect for that, okay? Because it's a larger crystal, it doesn't melt, it still would leave that nice crunch on top of your pastry crust there. It also has a nice caramel flavor. Sanding sugar, we've all seen sanding sugar.
What you say? You said that what? The Terminator? The Terminator sugar?
Turn on page. If you're following along in your book, go to page 905.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, RJ. Yes, RJ.
Are these type of sugars are still in the like Walmart, or you just gotta specifically go and find it?
No, turbinado sugar you can find in your local grocer. Sanding sugar typically is again a larger grain sugar. You can find them in the baking aisle already made for you, or you can take granulated sugar and put food dye in there and create your own colored sanding sugar. That would be a great way. They're usually used, you see them on top of like sugar cookies and stuff like that. You'll see colored usually when a lot of home bakers or even people in the chef industry, if we're making a cookie and we want to put colored sugar on top, we'll use sanding sugar. And then of course, your granulated sugar is common. It's just common table sugar that we use. Now you may, in some recipes, you'll see what's called a castor sugar. Especially in European countries, they use castor sugar, which is just a finer grain of sugar. You know, if you keep processing sugar, it turns into your powdered sugar. That's where 10X confectioner or powdered sugar comes from. It means it's been processed down into that 10 times fine powdered sugar. Okay, brown sugar.
So the powdered sugar is the finest.
Powdered sugar or confectioner's sugar is finely ground sugar. Now, to keep those granules apart from each other, if you look on the back of powdered sugar, and again, here's where I go ahead in my slides, powdered sugar actually has cornstarch in it. And that's to help it, not stick to each other, to stay separated. Okay?
Got it.
Brown sugar, believe it or not, to most people's dismay, brown sugar, and I think we just talked about this, or I did with somebody, brown sugar is actually white sugar with varying levels of molasses added back to it. So keep that in mind. Hey, Bruce, keep that in mind. It is not a brown sugar. It is a white sugar with molasses added back to it. Light actually has a little less, where dark has a little more of the molasses. That's why it has that molasses flavor to it. And then again, here is superfine or castor sugar, which is extra fine granulated sugar. And the reason you would use castor sugar or superfine sugar, if you have a project that you're doing where you're not manipulating the sugar at all, if you want it to dissolve quickly, that's why in most icings you're going to use powdered sugar, because when you put it into your butter or your Crisco or your if you're making Swiss meringue or something like that, you need it to melt. You don't want bits of crunchy granulated sugar, right? So that's why we use a smaller granule such as castor or powdered sugar. Now, liquid sweeteners, I won't go into all of those, but we have molasses, we have corn syrup, honey, maple syrup. There's lots of liquid sweeteners. We've got simple syrups. How many of y'all know what a simple syrup is? Look, if you like to drink alcohol, simple syrups are the sugar water that they make drinks with. That's typically a 1-to-1 ratio. They're using 1 part sugar, 1 part water. In the cake industry, we use simple syrups on our cakes. How many of you have made a cake and you've used like a lemon syrup or something like that to brush your cake to add either a flavor profile or moisture? That's a simple syrup.
What's Cairo?
What is Cairo syrup?
What type of syrup is that?
It's called a liquid sweetener. That's not technically a syrup. It's a liquid sweetener. It's less sweet than honey, but that is a refined sugar. Okay. Corn syrup or Cairo syrup is a refined sugar. All right. It's in there with the honey and the maple syrup. So typically, again, you have your light, you have your medium, and then you've got your heavy. So you can look at those. Let's see. That's going to be on page 907 in your book, okay? Now, cooked sugars. Cooked sugars are going to be like your, Robert, turn your mic off, please. Cooked sugars are going to be like your caramel sauce, your meringues. We'll be making meringues when y'all come back. If you do like Swiss meringue buttercream, candy, and other confections, cooked sugars can be unstable and susceptible to recrystallization. If you've ever made a caramel sauce, okay, you have to be really careful. You know, we typically take a pastry brush and we keep the sugar crystals off the side of the pot. Now, again, I'm not expecting y'all to remember all this. I'm breezing through the PowerPoints, but when we get back in class, I will show you visibly what I'm talking about. Also, that's a lot of times why you will see if you're making a caramel, we will add some of that corn syrup to that. That helps reduce the crystallization. And what do I mean by crystallization? Have you ever bought honey and it starts crystallizing in the jar? It starts getting glumpy together and gets all nasty. That's crystallization. And you can have that happen in cooked sugars if you're not very careful in preventing those, okay? I think y'all can look at the stages of cooked sugar on page 908, so I'm not going to go through those. If you've made candies, you will understand that different stages of cooked sugar. All right. And then they actually do have a photo there showing you. I can remember my mom saying, you know, I need a soft ball or hard ball or whatever. What little I did hear her cook, because she was not a big baker. But anyway, she did try candy here and there. I want you to remember that hot sugar syrups can burn, okay? There's a huge safety alert in your book. Please, anytime you're playing around with sugar, take extra precaution, okay? Let's breeze on fats now. We're leaving sugar, we're moving to fats. Fats, the number one fat that you're going to use in a bake shop is going to be butter, okay? It adds flavor, but it also adds moisture, okay, to your baked good. It melts at a relatively low temperature, and to be precise, 93 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's why buttercreams made with just butter typically cannot sit out if it's really warm outside. And then you have margarine that is used in a lot of rolled in doughs. It melts at a slightly higher temperature than butter. Personally, I prefer butter. I don't use margarine at all. I'm not saying anything against margarine. It has its place in the bake shop, but it's just not my go-to fat of choice. Now, lard, okay. How many know the difference between vegetable shortening and lard? That's always a good question. Who can tell me the difference between vegetable shortening and lard? Y'all know yet? All right. So
I think one is liquid, one is solid.
Nope.
Oh,
They can both be solids. But that's why you're in baking class, right? And this is the most boring part of baking class, I promise. When we get in the lab, woo, you better watch out. Lard is rendered pork fat, all right? Grandma used lard to fry, bake, and everything. It wasn't until, I can't remember the exact date, but I want to say the early 60s that they developed what we call vegetable shortening. And vegetable shortening typically is an oil, just like you go to the grocery store and you buy Crisco on the shelf or Wesson or whatever brand you like, it's in oil form. What they did and do is they put it through a process called hydrogenation. That's why they tell you partially hydrogenized products are not all that great for you. Hydrogenation is the process where they solidify that oil. hence you get your Crisco in your solid form, okay? So Crisco or vegetable shortening is prized in baked goods because it doesn't render that flavor, that animal earthy flavor that lard renders. So let's think about applications. If I was making a chicken pot pie and I was making my pie crust, all right, I would be more apt to use lard in that scenario because you've got the chicken earthy, wonderful, meaty flavor of your savory pie. So pairing that with a earthy flavored crust would be beautiful, right? It would be absolutely mouth-watering. It would add another flavor profile to that savory dish. Now, that same pie crust would not taste so good with a pastry cream in it and that animal flavor, would it? No. Would y'all, anybody want to eat that? I wouldn't want to eat that. All right. So lard is rendered pork fat. That's what you need to remember. You also need to remember lard creates a flakier pie crust. Okay. I can remember Julia Childs reading a quote from her that the best pastry crust contains lard and vegetable shortening. All right. So you need to remember that. Shortening is made from animal fats and vegetable fats. It is a vegetable oil, okay? And like I said, they are hydrogenated to make them solid. And oil is liquid. It blends throughout the mixture. The one thing I want you to make note when we talk about scaling, you cannot substitute a liquid fat for a solid fat, all right? Now, you can substitute melted solid fat for a liquid fat, but you cannot just take butter out and put oil in without doing a conversion, okay? Now, chemical leveling agents. Make sure on page 910 that you make note of these chemical leveling agents. They are very important. You will need to know all three of them, okay? Baking soda, which is sodium bicarbonate, and then baking powder, which baking powder can come single acting or double acting, okay? Single acting means that once the moisture hits it, it reacts and it's done. That's why anything you are making with a single acting baking powder, it must go directly into the oven. Double acting means that once moisture hits it, it partially reacts, but then it reacts again when the heat hits it, okay? So those recipes, you can actually leave on the countertop for a few minutes before you pop them in the oven. Does anybody have any questions on that? Because it's going to be important when we go in the kitchen that you understand the difference between baking soda and baking powder. They cannot be interchanged with each other. They do not react the same. And then you have baking ammonia. We don't see baking ammonia here. I've actually never seen it. It's not common, but a lot of your commercial manufacturers will use baking ammonia. Okay, just know that. Thickeners, obviously, you've got starches, which cornstarch is your bigger one. We use that to thicken pastry creams. We can use it to thicken compotes, sauces, a multitude of things. Fruit fillings, compotes, basically. Cornstarch, y'all made cornstarch slurries in savory, right? We make cornstarch slurries in savory. Same thing here. You dissolve it in cold water, and then when you heat it, it thickens, right? Same thing here. Baking, it does the same. Arrowroot is a thickening agent too. A lot of your health food bakers will use arrowroot, but it can break down when heated, so you have to be careful when using that. And we just talked about tapioca, right? We talked about that. It needs to be soaked. I told y'all didn't realize that. Y'all were thinking just little pearls and you eat them, but they're used as thickeners. They need to be soaked in cold water several hours before cooking, and as they cook, they absorb liquid. Tapioca pudding, it would be a prime example. All right. And then you have gelatin. How many of you have used gelatin? You buy the little Nor packs from the grocery store. Well, here we actually use gelatin sheets, and I'll go more into that. In the commercial kitchen, you're going to primarily use gelatin sheets, and we'll go more into that as we get into the kitchen. But they're actually derived from an animal protein. When good example in savory, when y'all made stocks, right? And you made when you made your stocks and you put them and you let them rest in the cooler, all that jelly that formed inside those stocks, that's gelatin. That's what we use as a thickener in baked goods. It's processed, obviously, so it's flavorless. But that's where gelatin comes from, the cartilage of animal bones where it's been boiled and separates and that sort of thing. And like I said, it's available in two forms, gelatin and sheet or leaf. Flavorings, there's a variety of flavorings from emulsions to extracts. Y'all can read that. I'm not going to go into that. The one thing I want to point out is most extracts are made by the process of soaking like vanilla beans in some form of alcohol. So extracts are made using some form of alcohol. So keep that in mind. Chocolate, obviously, chocolate is a big pastry flavoring. It comes in a variety of different aspects, from bars to nibs to callets, varying grades of white, dark, and milk. The one thing I want to point out is couverture. If I'm doing a baked good product, I will, for somebody, a paid product, I'll use couverture, which has a higher grade of butterfat in it. It melts smoother. It's beautiful, tastes better. But over your grocery store shelf, now don't get confused. Hear me, guys. Hear me, hear me, hear me. Do not get confused between real chocolate and compound chocolate, all right? When you go to the store, most of your chocolates on the shelf are considered compound chocolates. They're not really chocolate. Look at your ingredient list, okay? Chocolate is made from milk, all right, and the cocoa bean. It is not added this, all right? It has cocoa powder, and then it has your cocoa. So compound chocolates are a manufactured chocolate, so don't get confused with that. The nib is the usable part of the chocolate pod. The chocolate liqueur is the liquid that they extract from that nib or from that pod. The cocoa butter is the fat part of that liquid. They'll separate it. Cocoa powder is where they dry that chocolate, okay? They dry the product that remains after the cocoa butter's been removed. And then conching. On page 913, if you want to mark your book, you will need to know what conching is. It is on a test. I'm letting you know right now. Make sure that you know what conching is. It's a Swiss technique that increases smoothness in chocolate. You can read there on page 914 the factors of chocolate quality. You go by appearance, smell, break, texture. That's how they tell if chocolate is really good. And then, of course, you've got basically your types of chocolate. Your unsweetened, you've got your bittersweet, your semi-sweet, and y'all can look at the breakdowns of that. Obviously, unsweetened means there's no sugar added. Bittersweet or semi-sweet has at least 35% chocolate liqueur. And it has added the cocoa butter, sugar flavorings, and emulsifiers. Couverture is exactly what I just said. It is a high-quality chocolate containing 30% cocoa butter. The higher that cocoa butter percentage, the better quality your chocolate actually is. Milk chocolate, we call it milk chocolate, but it's got a lot of stuff added to it, okay? So read that section so you kind of understand. Milk chocolate actually has sugar, vanilla, milk solids, and other flavorings. And then chocolate chips, okay? Chocolate chips are just drops of chocolate. You got cocoa powder, all right? There in your cocoa powder, you typically have two types. You have your Dutch processed, which is where it's been processed to remove the alkaline out of it, and it interacts differently within your baked product than your regular standard cocoa powder, which is alkalized. All right, and then cocoa butter. Obviously, that's the fat that comes from the cocoa bean. White chocolate, what's interesting when you look at white chocolate there, white chocolate really is not chocolate. There's no chocolate in white chocolate, okay? All of the cocoa has been removed, and then it's just your butterfat. It contains no chocolate solids or liqueurs, okay, in that. And then, like I said, your compound chocolate, that's your imitation chocolate, okay? How many of you have seen, and I love it, the compound chocolates? When I say compound chocolate, like you'll see pretzels dipped in Wilton candy melts. Wilton candy melts are not chocolate, all right? Or if you look on the shelf, again, there's like your Ghirardelli and your what is that brand that has the baking bars that a lot of people use during the holiday time. They'll create bark out of it, or they'll do chocolate. They call them chocolate-covered pretzels or chocolate-covered strawberries or whatever. Those are compound chocolates. They are not real chocolate, okay? So just keep that in mind.
So M&M's is not real chocolate?
Huh?
M&M's is not real chocolate?
M&M's is, if you look at the recipe, they are using chocolate. That has nothing to do with compound chocolate. Yeah, they're using chocolate. But again, you need to be aware that a lot of your baker's chocolate that you see at the grocery store on the shelf, they potentially can be compound chocolates. They are not a true chocolate. They are a man-made chocolate, all right? Obviously, you got nuts. They come in a variety of forms. You can read through that there on page 916. Now, again, talking about measuring ingredients, and we're getting towards the tail end of this PowerPoint. Measuring your ingredients, you got to remember to be precise and accurate. And I'm on page 919. Make sure that you look at that, all right? It is important that you understand that ingredients do not weigh the same, all right? And that the most accurate way of measuring is scaling, all right? You need to use a scale. Balance scales are often used in a bake shop. That's a negatory. In today's world, we have digital scales, okay? What they're talking about is those balance scales where you put the little things up top. That's more old school. You may see those in some older bake shops, but nowadays we have digital scales.
You
okay?
talking about triple beam?
Huh?
Are you talking about triple beam scale? That's what you talking about?
If that's what you call it.
That's what you said? You said it got a little thing with the things on the top. It's like it got like three beams on it, like a triple beam scale.
Yeah, that's going to be a form of a balance scale. Yes.
Okay.
But
I was just asking. I wasn't trying to correct. I wasn't trying to correct you, and then I was asking.
No. Good question. And you don't typically see those much anymore. You see more digital scales, but you may go into a bake shop where you see them. Okay. All right. Let's talk about baker's percentage. I'm not going to go too deep off into this because when you come back, we'll have to cover it again. You'll never remember. The main thing I want you to remember, and I wrote it here on the board, and I want you to look at page 920 in your book. Flour is always 100% of any formula, okay? And to get your baker's percentage, you're going to have your weight of your ingredients over the weight of your flour. And then you're going to multiply that by 100, all right? So when we look at that, we'll go into it deeper when we come back. But 921, I need y'all to study that because when we do come back together, you're going to have a baker's percentage exercise, and you're going to have to do that, okay? And then, again, I'm not going to go into trying to figure out baker's percentage with y'all online. Mixing ingredients, if you look here on page 923, make sure you take a look at how to mix your ingredients, all right? It really, the process of mixing is very important, and it has specific steps. Robert, will you turn your mic off, please? Mixing your ingredients is important, and how you do it. It incorporates air, the length that you do it. It's all very important. So make sure you look at page 923 and you look at your mixing ingredients. Now, the one thing I need you, yes, Robert McCall, RJ.
Oh, you can call out my government name. Okay. Is that the way you want us to write our recipe, just like that?
No, we're going to be looking at some recipes, not today, but when you come back, I will make sure prior to you coming back that you have an understanding, because the recipes are going to be written the way they are written in your book. Your recipes are coming from your book. So between now and the time we come together, I need you to look at your recipes in your book to get an idea of how we're going to write out our formulas. Okay?
Got it.
All right. So the 9 mixing methods, you will need to know those. Letting you know. You will need to know those. Beating, blending, creaming, cutting, folding, kneading, sifting, stirring, and whipping. So highlight that any way you want. You are going to need to know those mixing methods. All right. Formula conversions, we will look more at that when we look at our baker's percentage and y'all come back. We will go more into formula conversion. So don't get all worked up over that formula. And then again, converting total yield. It's really simple. It's going to be old over new, or I'm sorry, new over old. And we'll be doing that. So yeah, new over old. And we'll be going into that together. And then, of course, they've got all these examples that you can look at. The main thing I want to go down to at this point, because you need to know this, you can start memorizing this. Page 924, the baking process. I'm going to tell you right now, you need to know that on quiz 1. You need to know that on quiz 2. You're going to need to know that on your final. All right? Now, I don't want you to get so worked up over this that you can't do international, because we've got some time before we come back together. But I did want to introduce you to the baking process. Make sure you know that, okay? Gases form, gases are trapped, starches gelatinize, proteins coagulate, fats melt, water evaporates, sugars caramelize, and then you have staling. So make sure you know those, okay? And that is the end of that PowerPoint. And I want to just briefly go through our quick breads, because that's what we will be diving into as soon as you come back. So make sure when you get ready to come back, quick breads are at the top of your list, because we'll start right into biscuit production. All right. That's going to be what we're coming into. So quick breads on page 928, if you're following along in your book. Quick breads are tender products with a soft crumb. When we're doing quick breads, we try to manipulate the product very little, so we create that tender crumb, all right? And we're also using cold fat, all right? Cold butter or cold Crisco. And then obviously we are adding some sort of leveling agent like baking powder. How many of you have ever made biscuits? I make them all the time. You ever make biscuits? So you know exactly what I'm talking about. Mixing methods on page, that's probably right after, I didn't put the note on my page on my PowerPoint, but right there with page 928 or somewhere close to, you're going to see those mixing methods. You need to know those. Just letting you know, highlight it now. You need to know those. All right. That's part of your homework today. All right. Is your mixing methods. I think today or tomorrow. Somebody can correct me. The biggest thing you need to remember, biscuit method uses cold, solid fat. Remember that. Chilled, solid fat. Muffin method uses liquid fat. And that's what I need you to remember. Biscuit, cold or chilled solid fat. Muffin method, liquid fat, okay? Creaming method is softened fat with sugar, all right? Softened fat. And that's your correlation between those three. Don't get confused with that. My last students got confused. When I say what is creaming method, I don't want you to say creamed butter and sugar. I need to know in those methods, I need to know the biscuit method is chilled solid fat. Muffin method, liquid fat. Creaming method is softened butter or softened fat. All right. That's what you need to know. Biscuit method is obviously cold solid fat. I'm going to say it a million times. And that's what we use to make biscuits, scones, shortcakes. You can look there on page 929, the steps in biscuit making. This is the technique. So anytime something says biscuit method, you're going to use this technique. Don't get methods mixed up with techniques. They're two separate animals, all right? So what is biscuit method? Somebody tell me, what is biscuit method? Chitaria, what's biscuit method?
Cold fat.
Cold fat. You can't miss that. All right? Now, when you use biscuit method and you're making biscuits, this on page 929 is the technique. You're going to measure the ingredients, sift the dry ingredients, cut in the cold solid fat, combine the liquid ingredients, including the eggs. You're going to add the liquid to the dry. You're going to mix just until incorporated. Then you're going to put it in and you're going to knead it, and then you're going to do whatever you're going to do with it. So don't get confused between methods and techniques, all right? Again, muffin method is oil. It's going to be liquid fat, or it can be melted fat, okay? I know one recipe that we're going to do, we melt our butter, and that's in our muffins, our blueberry muffins. Yum, 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 yum. Can't wait. I gain 10 pounds every time I have a pastry class. And then, of course, it creates a tender cake-like product. You can look at that on page 931. And then there's your steps, aka technique of how to make muffins. That is your steps. It will never change. If a chef comes up to you and says, I need you to make muffins, all right, you're going to automatically know muffin method, and this is the steps you're going to do. I don't care what ingredients are involved. You're going to use this technique in a muffin method. Are y'all getting my point across there? Creaming method is the same, all right? Creaming method means we're going to have room temperature fat, all right? And we're going to cream it with our sugar. Most Southern style cakes use creaming method, all right? Now there's other styles of cake. There's other methods for cake. And that's not to say you can't use a muffin method for cake, right? Y'all have done that where you put all your liquid in one bowl. You have all your flours, baking powder, salt, sugar, whatever in another bowl. And then you pour your liquid into your dry. That's actually muffin method or muffin technique doing a cake, right? So once you learn these techniques, you can apply them in other areas. Creaming method can be used to make muffins. It can be used to make cakes. There's various ways you can use that. So understand that, okay? We're not using cold or liquid in a creaming method. We're using room temperature. All right, and then steps of the creaming method. Make sure you take a look at that. In your homework, hello, you need to know what tunneling is. Who can tell me what tunneling is? Anybody know what tunneling is? And we're almost at the end of this, I promise. I knew today would be a little longer. We're covering 2 PowerPoints. What is
Mixing?
tunneling? Huh?
Is it mixing? I don't know. Mixing?
Tunneling is creating a large tubular holes in muffins and cakes, a defect caused by improper mixing. That's on page 931, y'all.
Yes, thank you. I see a couple of you have your books open. I keep trying to throw out page numbers to keep you on target with me. Tunneling is caused by improper mixing of your batter, okay? You ever make a scratch cake and you go to tort it or level it? I know y'all don't know what that means yet, but you will when we do a cake. And you're looking at your cake layer and it's got a bunch of holes in it, all right? Some of it is expected, especially in a scratch cake. But if it looks like a bunch of worms lived in your cake and ate holes in it, that's because of improper mixing, okay? That causes irregular holes. When you have that, you can actually have uneven rising in your product as well. So keep that in mind. That is tunneling. And then at the very end of this PowerPoint, there's a troubleshooting chart. That's on page 935. Check that out. So the next time you do a baked product, you can see what some of the troubles typically can be. Or guess what? I'm your chef from here on out. I still have students from 2012 that call me when they have baking questions or problems. Does anybody have any question on bake shop ingredients, or in particular our biscuit method, or quick breads, because we will be coming back and I will do a brief go over of these two chapters, and we will be diving straight into the kitchen so we can get y'all baking. Any questions? Before Chateria falls asleep. Did you work last night, girlfriend? Yeah, I get that. I get that. And mama's watching. You better be careful. All right, any questions about today? Are y'all ready for baking? I know it's hard to get too excited because you got to get through international first. Who's excited for international? I am.
Ready to get in the lab. Woo.
Ready to get in the lab. I'm excited because I get to eat whatever y'all make, right? And I'm telling you, Chef Peter Vossenberg, I'm not sure what he's going to have y'all call him. Probably Chef Vossenberg, I would imagine. That's the proper respect and way to communicate. But he's an amazing chef. You guys are going to learn so much. I know that you're going to just absorb so much from him. Everybody wave bye to our taping. I'm going to let this go so it doesn't get any longer. Thanks for hanging out on Baking Day 1. And yeah, bye-bye, everybody.